Think you know your eye color? If you have hazel eyes, think again. That rare color-shifting trait, eyes that seem to change from green to gold depending on the light, isn't just a curiosity. It's a clue, a biological signal pointing toward one of the strangest and most layered stories in all of human genetics. Only around 5% of people on Earth have hazel eyes. But walk through parts of Spain or Portugal, and that number climbs dramatically. One Spanish study found more than half its cohort had hazel or hazel green eyes. That concentration isn't random. It's the result of thousands of years of migration, mixture, and selection playing out on a single peninsula at the edge of Europe. And here's the part that should stop you. Scientists can predict brown or blue eyes from DNA with 90 to 95% accuracy. For hazel, that number collapses to between 50 and 80%. The most sophisticated genetic tools available still cannot fully explain this trait. Start with the color shifting itself, because it isn't an illusion. One mechanism is light scattering, the same process that makes the sky look blue. Light entering the iris scatters depending on the angle and intensity of the source, so change the lighting and you change what the eye looks like. But hazel layers extra complexity on top. The melanin inside a hazel iris is unevenly distributed, usually a brownish ring around the pupil with greener or golden tones spreading outward, and shifting the balance of pigment even slightly shifts the color with it. Hazel sits almost exactly between blue and brown on the melanin spectrum, and that intermediate position is precisely where the genetics get complicated. The old model of eye color was simple: brown dominant, blue recessive, one or two genes doing the work. That model was wrong, and nowhere does it fall apart more completely than with hazel. The primary players are two genes on chromosome 15, OCA2 and HERC2, which regulate melanin in the iris. Brown-eyed people carry variants driving high melanin, blue-eyed people carry variants that suppress it, and hazel-eyed people sit in the middle. But those two genes don't tell the whole story. Several others contribute: SLC24A4 and SLC45A2, influencing where on the spectrum an eye lands, ASIP and IRF4 influencing how light scatters inside the iris, suppressing and amplifying each other in combinations researchers are still mapping. This is what polygenic inheritance looks like. Not one gene making one decision, but a whole network producing an outcome that resists clean prediction. Hazel eyes remain partly beyond prediction because they're partly beyond explanation. So where did they come from? Brown eyes are the original, that much is settled. Our species emerged with brown eyes, high melanin protecting the iris in equatorial sun. For most of prehistory, there was no other option. Brown wasn't a color, it was the default. Blue is much younger, but older than most people assume. A 2008 study estimated it emerged 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, and later research pushed that back further, with mutations linked to blue eyes found in remains from the Caucasus and Italy dating 13 to 14,000 years ago. Blue eyes were in Europe long before the first farmers arrived. And that detail is everything. The Western hunter-gatherers who had roamed Europe for millennia largely carried blue eyes. The farmers who moved in from Anatolia around 8,000 to 6,000 years ago largely carried brown. When these two populations mixed, something intermediate became possible for the first time. That intersection is almost certainly where hazel eyes first appeared in meaningful numbers. Not one person, not one moment, but a population-level event, blue-eyed and brown-eyed ancestry combining to produce offspring whose melanin landed between the two extremes. The first hazel eyes weren't an accident of mutation, they were the biological result of two worlds colliding. That collision happened across much of Europe. So why did hazel eyes concentrate so heavily in one corner of it? Because the Iberian Peninsula sits at a precise intersection. Northern populations moving south carried the blue-eyed legacy of hunter-gatherers and steppe peoples. North African populations moving north across the narrow straits carried brown-eyed ancestry. Iberia absorbed both, across multiple waves spanning thousands of years. Climate reinforced it because hazel is most common in temperate zones where moderate melanin carries an advantage. Too far north, selection favors lighter eyes. Too far south, higher melanin becomes essential. Iberia sits in neither extreme. A landmark study of 271 ancient Iberians traced these conditions across 8,000 years, revealing a region that never stopped absorbing new ancestry. It begins around 5,500 BC, when the first farmers arrived from Anatolia, layering brown-eyed ancestry over the lighter-eyed hunter-gatherers already there. Then the Bronze Age brought the most dramatic shift Iberia had ever seen. Between roughly 2200 and 900 BC, about 40% of Iberian ancestry was replaced by groups carrying steppe ancestry from the Pontic-Caspian region in a heavily male-biased migration that nearly erased the earlier male lineages and replaced them with the marker R1b. Those steppe populations carried lighter pigmentation, deepening the blue-eyed contribution already there. Then came Al-Andalus, from 711 to 1492, nearly 8 centuries of concentrated North African gene flow, the deepest admixture layer the peninsula ever accumulated. Each wave left something behind. Iberia never replaced what came before. It folded it in. Those layers are still readable today. On the paternal side, R1b dominates, carried by 60 to 70% of Iberian men, the direct echo of that Bronze Age wave, while North African branches of E1b1b appear in 5 to 15%. On the maternal side, haplogroup H dominates at 40 to 50%, U5 connects back to ancient hunter-gatherers, and U6 traces directly to North African Berbers. This is what a Hazel-eyed person looks like at the population level. Not one ancestry, not two, but multiple streams of human movement converging on a single peninsula and producing a color science still can't fully predict. And that's the humbling part. Brown and blue eyes differ mainly at a single well-understood spot in the genome. Hazel involves a network of interacting genes whose combined behavior the best models predict correctly only 50 to 80% of the time. For a field that can read ancient migrations from fragments of bone, that gap is striking. Egyptian, Greek, and Celtic traditions all linked hazel eyes with perception beyond the ordinary. Science now explains the mechanism, but it doesn't dissolve the strangeness. Because what hazel eyes ultimately are is an archive. Every hazel-eyed person alive carries the biological record of populations that met, mixed, and moved across thousands of years. The hunter-gatherers whose blue-eyed descendants collided with brown-eyed farmers, the steppe migrants who reshaped a peninsula in one Bronze Age wave, the North Africans who crossed into Iberia and stayed for 8 centuries. None of them knew they were building toward anything. They were living, moving, surviving. But the result is visible today in the eyes of 1 in 20 people on Earth. So next time you catch a hazel eye shifting from green to gold, understand what you're seeing. Thousands of years of human migration expressed as color, the record of a crossroads that never stopped absorbing the world around it. The mystery isn't a flaw in the science, it's a feature of the history, and that history is still very much alive.